Hi everyone, today we got a pretty aggressive sell-off here today. You can see straight down bars throughout the session. Last candle was a slight bounce here, just barely off of the trend structure here. But now you have a high, lower high structure. We've seen structures like this similarly, high, lower high here, sold off, ended up holding a base in here before rallying. You still have a low, slightly higher low here. Is this going to be consolidation? Let's take a quick look at all of the charts as we head into the end of the week trading. Do me a quick favor and like and subscribe and watch the video till the end to help out the channel, and let's get started. Moving over to news here, we got foreclosures jumping 20% as a sign of more distress in the housing market and really in the overall economy. Here you can see completed foreclosures, the final phase were up 32% year over year, rose 6% for the month, and that is absolutely terrible, 20% more than a year ago. So all of these numbers are not very good. You can see 3% higher from September and that 20% higher from October of 24. But they do highlight here, even with these increases, obviously well below historical highs, not indicating that this is a catastrophe quite yet, but this elevation should give you a little bit of pause and wonder what's going on underneath the hood when it comes to the economy. And for some reference here, you can see during the Great Recession, 4% of mortgages were in foreclosure. Right now, that's less than 0.5%, well below historical average of 1 to 1.5%. In addition, 4% of mortgages were delinquent, where the financial crisis peak was about 12%. So we're not quite getting into that like broken territory, but there is a little bit of a trend that is concerning. Moving over to fear and greed here, we're at a 24 from a 34. Obviously, everything stepping down pretty dramatically. Fear on momentum, extreme fear on most of the metrics. Aside from that, surprised to see put-call ratio not jumping up too much. Volatility spiking off of that SMA. Safe haven demand still in fear. Junk bond demand moving a little bit higher, still extreme fear, and the overall metric already in extreme fear. Moving over to the economic calendar, not a whole lot of data here for today. 30-year bond auction came in a little bit lower than the previous number. Fed balance sheet actually increased a little bit. Interesting to see that. They did say they were ending that quantitative tightening. A little bit of a bump there, and then you can see for the Friday, not a whole lot of anything for tomorrow. I would expect markets to continue to move in the direction they've been going. Moving over to the charts, look at that big red bar, 1.66% on the day. Absolutely terrible, moving much lower, right down to that trend line, hitting the trend line perfectly. Talked about that being a zone of support. 55 EMA was support last time. That is now at 665. 44, it's going to be right in the area of my next level around 667. So do we get the fall to that area? That would give you about another almost 1%, just short of 1%. You can see big momentum, big volume on the session as well. I would expect some follow through on that. We're seeing just a smidgen of a bounce in the after hours. I'm not putting a whole lot of weight in that. And even if we get it, I would expect that to be a lower high. Just the volume on it, not great at all. Very solid selling, straight down, closed on the low. Everything says we should get some continuation off of that. Even if it is like a continuation like this, where you get a big move down, find support in that area, and then start to rally up again. Either way, looking for that continuation lower tomorrow. And if we do get that continuation into this area, and we start to break structure, we got the first test of the 55, we start to see that second test, consolidation, pullback in time, topping pattern. That is going to be a big bearish signal. Moving over to the Tasty charts, you can see that same kind of setup here on the daily chart, not breaking below that ATR trailing stop. That is still 665.12. You can see 55 EMA in there, 664.85. That is going to be a zone of support. At least I would expect it to be that same 55 EMA area as this continues to consolidate sideways. As long as it's not going higher here, that is definitely going to be a sign of bearishness. You can see momentum step to bearish on the volume weighted MACD, good volume spike on the sell, again indicating that markets are likely going to sell here at least a little bit. 4-hour chart, very much bearish conditions. We had a brief bullish period, back into bearish, hitting that lowest ATR band, touched that band, bounced just a smidgen. Either way, still expecting this to roll down here. You can see the upper band starting to roll down a little bit, lower bands definitely rolling down. And then of course on the hourly chart, we were already in bearish conditions here, and then we got the massive continuation overthrow here. That's why we're seeing just a little bit of a bounce. We were just too extended. Going to see this kind of chop sideways, probably, maybe even a slight bounce, but I would expect this to go lower with how aggressive the move was. And then look at all of that volume selling throughout the session. Moving over to the NASDAQ, this looks even more ominous here. You can see we came up, hit that 200 SMA on the hourly chart, touched that zone and immediately pulled back, consolidated and sold back below the level there, 611.75. Support is going to be the trend line here around 603.50 or so. Didn't get into that area. I was a little bit surprised on that. Found a little bit of a bounce, very, very small there. Didn't come into the trend line, didn't come into that 55 EMA. I thought we would sell just a smidgen more. Didn't quite happen, but same setup. Momentum very bearish, RSI very bearish. Big selling on the volume. And again, coming up very short on this kind of high, lower high structure. You can see it here on the hourly chart, both of these looking not very good now. So again, I would expect buys to be met with selling. Moving over to the Tasty charts, you can see we came very close to my buy price on those shares. Didn't quite get there, still doing okay. I am deep in the money now at this point. I rolled my calls down on this sell here, so didn't love that. Honestly, should have rolled down sooner probably. Ultimately, I think this is going to fall more, like I said, and I want to have that covered call in there. I rolled it down for more protection, but honestly probably should have been out here when we were in bearish conditions. Could have seen that coming. I talked about it yesterday as a potential lower high setup here, high, lower high. Didn't hit those upper bands, showed weakness, and then we sold to that lowest band here. So expecting this to go lower. And then looking at that daily chart, wanted to highlight that this did flip conditions, right? So we had bearish conditions here, flip back to bullish for a second, back to bearish here now. So your trailing stop up there at 644.16, got bearish close, 55 EMA is still support, big volume, everything says even more bearish here on the NASDAQ. Moving over to the Russell and the Dow, both of these having terrible days, 2.81%, Dow down also 1.66%. Big sells on the session, broke those levels, sold back below 238, not great there either. Momentum bearish, big volume. This is very ominous, right? Definitely looks like the Russell is rolling over. This topping pattern has broken now. We're below this kind of neckline, even that 238 level that kind of held up support the last couple times. We've closed well below it now. If we get any kind of confirmation to the downside, this is likely to sell to that 144 EMA, and that would give you about 4.5%, 4.75% of selling back down to that 225 area, and then we'll see what happens after that. But I would expect a bigger sell now with this pretty clear topping pattern. Moving over to the Mag 7. Mag 7 broke down below the level 357.91. Big sell 2.27 on the move. Momentum bearish, volume ramping. Everything says this should go towards that 144 EMA. That's going to take us down about another 5% potentially into here. We're already a pretty decent way off of the highs, about 9, almost 10% off of that wick high. And now we're headed back down probably another 5% into that area. Maybe we get a left shoulder here. I don't think it's impossible, but right now this structurally looks pretty awful. Moving over to Apple and Microsoft. Apple hit that level once again. We put it on the chart yesterday, 275.91, tagged that level and then sold off. This is going to be a top most likely, at least in the short term. Momentum bearish, RSI definitely overbought. And then looking at Microsoft here, 1.5% down once again below that level. Got above it briefly, 506.71. We're back below it here. You still have kind of this neckline in here. I don't have a level on it, but kind of this 495 area, and then that 144 EMA sitting just below it, 491.68. This looks like a top here, and it has looked like a top really for the last couple of months. Got here in kind of mid-July, and we're still here in mid-November. Don't think this is really going to crater necessarily, but I think that at least stopped. And don't forget, there are still tons of gaps left. Moving over to Tesla and NVIDIA. Tesla broke down 6.64%. Massive break through this structure here. Had the trend line, broke, level 414.50 broke, back below everything. Just barely looks like it tagged that gap here back from September 12th, but everything is broken here. You would need to see this come up, get back above 414.50 to stay bullish. Otherwise, this is probably headed back down to 384.21, and then my next level here would be really the 144 EMA down there at 357.55, my level 355.03 in here. So watch this one here, realistically probably headed here. Momentum bearish, RSI bearish, everything not great. And then NVIDIA still holding up really well considering 3.5% down on the day. The level is that kind of 184 area, momentum bearish, RSI bearish. Is this structure going to hold? 55 EMA also right there at 184.08. If this structure breaks, that is going to be terrible for NVIDIA, but so far this is still very much bullish. bullish. Moving over to Meta and Alphabet here. Meta found a bounce, 0.14, kind of was leading the sell already, right? We'd already sold a lot on Meta, came into a zone of support at 602.95. We've been watching this zone here. If this zone breaks, your next one is kind of 564 area, but right now it's holding a little bit of support in here around 602. Interesting. We've slowed this descent, tagged that level twice. Interesting. And then look at Alphabet. Topping pattern here. We were watching this for a breakout continuation. Now you have a consolidation and likely a break back down to that 21 EMA. If the 21 breaks, then you're looking for the 55 down here around 250. Moving over to staples and discretionaries, you got staples hanging in there really well, flat on the day, hanging in there at the level 77.50, absolutely risk off. People holding staples after this sell. Buyers came in, big volume, we saw the break there, and then we saw discretionaries sell off a lot, 2.5%. Of course, Tesla, Amazon, both terrible on the day, but structurally breaking back below the trend line, breaking back below that level, and now your next zone is going to be that kind of 227 area. I guess you could argue maybe low, higher low here. Really, the level 227 is interesting. Momentum bearish, RSI bearish. Moving over to breadth. No surprises on breadth. Breadth cratered here today, selling off back below that 50 level. On 20-day, we were kind of in that zone we were talking about where we were either going to pivot and push higher or we were going to pivot lower, and we ended up going lower off of that. Same here on 50-day. We had this pretty consistent trend line of the 55 EMA has been resistance the last several iterations. We came into that zone here. We came into the level 52.81 and we sold off. So at this point, expecting this to sell back down to here, potentially even a lower low, which means more aggressive selling is likely. Moving over to the dollar, even the dollar sold off here today, surprisingly so, considering how bearish markets were. Usually the dollar is kind of the inverse of that, but everything sold here today except for staples. You can see down about a quarter. It's right at the 21 EMA here. It overthrew it a little bit. Not everything is broken. It could certainly come into here and hold support and get the bigger continuation, but realistically, I would really like to see it hold that 21 EMA right there at 98.45. It's not closed yet. We are rallying just a little bit, but structurally this does not look super great. Moving over to bonds, we have J&K selling off again here. We talked about it yesterday, signaled big sells were coming, and it sure enough did. Massive volume, massive selling yesterday. Continuation here today, down almost another 0.5%, almost into that area, 96.50, and then even TLT down 0.82. Wonder what's going on. Everything sells are dangerous. That is what we're seeing a little bit. This still looks like a left shoulder head, maybe right shoulder forming. So I wouldn't say it's completely dead yet. You got the level here in 89.16, but equities are selling, the dollars are selling, the bonds are selling. Not good to see everything selling across the board. Definitely keep that in mind as we head into tomorrow's trading. Moving over to the VIX, you can see VIX spiking up 14.23% right to that 20 level. That continues to be an interesting level. Are we going to get through it? Last time we threw wicks, we sold off, but you got the low, higher low here. Looks like this is going to be a bigger spike over the next day or two. That's what I'm looking at. Probably to that 28 area. Do we go higher than that? That is the bigger question. Moving over to my accounts here, I did lose quite a bit of money down to 141.5 or so. You can see the NASDAQ bouncing just a little bit here in the after hours. Max profit there is going to be around 610.50 or so. You can see $5.69 credit, so 510.69. Looking for this to bounce just a smidgen tomorrow. Want to get out of these shares at this point. There's just too much signaling that this is likely a top, likely to fall a substantial amount. And once it falls a substantial amount, then we can start to flip more to the bull side. Maybe I'll look to sell calls at various levels, but for now, I just want to get out of this position, kind of reset here. This still looks like a topping pattern. I don't think everything is broken yet, but I do think the top is likely in at this point. And then same here for the IWM, rolled down to 238, and I guess I was not aggressive enough here on that position. You can see did bounce a little bit after hours. Hopefully we can get a little bit of a rally there, but again, didn't protect myself enough on that position. 600 down, you can see only 200 on the day. Again, fairly protected, but not as much as I should have. Should have rolled this down a little bit more. Want to get out of these shares tomorrow. Let me know down in the comments section what you think of the housing market. Is the sell-off a signal, or is it just a little blip rising slightly from a pretty depressed level? What do you think of the overall markets? Are we in that topping pattern? How much lower can we go from here? Otherwise, like and subscribe if you got any value out of this video. Make sure you hit the bell so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Of course, none of this is financial advice. This is all for entertainment purposes. Good luck in your trading and have a great day.